Welcome to Conscious Quest, the LA-based podcast where we aim to stay conscious about everything current. Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Conscious Quest. I am your host, Sarah Parlow.
And I am Rishi.
And today we are continuing with our series about how to change your mind. Last time, for our previous episode, we had talked with Rishi about the use of psychedelics and ketamine, the history of these substances, and how they're being applied in the modern sense. And where are we going to go today, Rishi?
So we are going to talk about neuroplasticity, which is a very interesting subject, and then how to best use it to unlock and get rid of some trauma that we all carry. And how can we heal?
Beautiful. I'm so excited about today. And I want to start, first of all, with a quote. And this is from an ancient Chinese philosopher by the name of Lao Tzu. And he said this, you might recognize this, everyone. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions because they become your habits. And watch your habits because they become your character. Watch your character because it becomes your destiny. So I guess the point of that whole saying is everything begins with your thoughts. And for those of us who are stuck in sort of patterns that do not serve us, what Rishi has to talk about today is so valuable. And so how would we define neuroplasticity, Rishi?
Well, it's a great question. And I think the first time neuroplasticity was coined was back in the early, I think like 1920s, right around there. And we started having more of a theory on the brain. It's interesting how much knowledge that we've gained in just, 120 years about our brain. And, even for the longest time, it's so funny. In Egyptian times, people thought the brain was just an organ that released heat, and didn't really understand even how we thought. And of course, we know that's not the truth and how important our brain is. And of course, our mind and our programming and everything else is, contained within the brain. Neuroplasticity is a concept, and it's where your brain is continuously changing, right? It is something where your brain is composed of about 80 trillion about 80 trillion neurons, which is quite a bit. These are all, and neurons are your nerve cells or your brain cells. And each one of these cells have the capability of connecting with other cells. And once they connect with more than one cell and they connect with other cells, neurons, I should say, they make a network. And this network, through a miracle of nature, and through millions and billions of years of evolution, we're able to then have programming. We're able to think, we're able to have concepts and able to see in everything that we do as conscious creatures. And the idea of neuroplasticity is that your brain is never just in one position. It is always constantly moving. So for instance, if you have a new memory, there are parts of your brain called the hippocampus that will change shapes, right? It'll change in order to then capture that memory. It is an amazing process. Of course, we're still learning how it is, and maybe we will understand that one day fully. But the word neuroplasticity means that your brain is constantly changing. And now I want to make a point, Sarah, is that the brain will change even if you don't want it to. It is a unconscious thing. And so either you change the brain or someone else will, or your environment will. And that's the part that we all have to be, consciously on the quest for. Hey, so again, either you change it or someone else will. And that's the interesting part about neuroplasticity.
That is a brilliant point. So who is the master of your life? Are you at the whims of your environment, or are you the one controlling the ship. And it's beautiful. In the Bhagavad Gita, it talks a lot about how the five senses are like five different horses that drag you along in your chariot. And unless you are the one in conscious control of your mind, then you're at the mercy of your senses in a way. So yeah, you nailed it. Neuroplasticity is the ability to alter brain structure in response to an experience. And apparently there are certain critical periods that the brain goes through developmentally at certain times. Like when we're young, it is incredibly neuroplastic because it serves the survival of the organism to really be a sponge and take in a lot of information and grow exponentially. But of course, this type of growth is not sustainable or would be good for us because it would lead to, seizures and probably other health issues. But it's interesting that there are these sort of cyclical natures to how neuroplasticity works. And I listened to a TED Talk today by Dr. Laura Boyd, who is a researcher from the University of Vancouver. And she said that every time you learn a new fact or skill, you are in essence changing your brain. And that the biggest driver of change in your brain is behavior. And I thought
that makes a lot of sense. That's it's super interesting, of course. Yes, and go on. Like I want to hear more if you have something more to say about it.
So essentially, it's not true that we could just take a pill as a substitute in order to change the plasticity of our brain. We actually do, as we've indicated before in previous episodes, we have to do the work. So what is the work and what does that look like? And you have some interesting tools in your arsenal specifically to help with brain plasticity.
Oh, for sure. I think again, part of life, again, what you said before is that there's different phases, that we go through in terms of neuroplasticity. And of course, when we're young, we are sponges and we're able to, make the changes quickly. We're always learning something. When you're a baby, you have to learn even what a ball is or who your parents are, how to get food, how to communicate. So it's constantly in this massive flux. But what's interesting is that it can become static later on, and especially people who are stuck in their ways. Well, actually they might be, as we get older, for instance, it's more difficult to learn things, for instance, if you were to learn a language before the age of 12 and were to really nail it, you wouldn't actually have an accent. I mean, you wouldn't. But if you learn a language after 12, for some reason, the age of 12 is a very important cutoff for that. And then you learn, but you'd always have an accent. So if you move to Germany at age 14, you might still have like an American accent, and if you're speaking in German. And the tools that we have, I mean, I think that cognitive behavioral therapy, any type of therapy to help you think in a different way, is one of the things. DBT therapy as well. We can touch on EMDR as well. EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is just a way for us to unlock trauma memories. So the way that we actually learn traumatic memories is a different process than what we do for normal memories. And EMDR was a process that was developed starting in about the 80s. Using science allows us to go back and to push them into different directions so they're not as strong, causing loops. At our clinic, as the administrator of the program, we have a lot of our clients using ketamine, causes neuroplasticity, which is very interesting and useful for them. We can talk. I've talked at length about ketamine. We also use TMS as well. Hypnotherapy can cause neuroplasticity, but other things in life can cause neuroplasticity. If you learn anything, that's causing neuroplasticity. If you travel, there is people love traveling because it puts them in a state of a neuroplastic state. I know, Sarah, you love to travel, and it feels like an adventure. Yeah, you probably feel like you're on an adventure and like there's new things happening, and it's that feeling of it, like whatever it might be, you're learning new things, and people crave that, instead of the routine that they have. learning a new instrument, learning anything, using your left hand to pick up. If you're right-handed and you use your left hand to do anything, that's causing neuroplasticity. Lifting like weights actually causes. So whatever it is that we're really engaging our brain, that's going to cause the neurons to fire. You're going to have increased neurogenic growth factor (NGF), which is it's like a miracle grow for your neurons. You pour some of that NGF in, it'll grow your neurons a little bit. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things we can do.
So, in order to connect with what we said earlier and what you're saying, it's really about behaviors. Behaviors are what drive the change in the brain. And I love that you brought up travel. The thing that I love about travel personally is that when I'm in a new environment, I'm not relying on my mental shortcuts. I'm having to be more hyper aware. It almost feels like your sense of survival is sharpened because you're in a new environment. And so, yeah, you're taking things in a way that you probably wouldn't. Um, we were talking a lot about trauma. And one of the things I'd like for us to point out about trauma is when we have these sort of intense negative experiences or memories, what seems to happen is these things get magnified in the brain and they can actually interfere with our functioning. And so that's why there is so much research about addressing this. And let's face it, all of us as human beings, just by living, have trauma. And I think that there have been a lot of modalities used historically. There is trauma work. I've done trauma work with coaches like Mastin Kipp, and some of that work is really about diving into that experience. The problem with it is really you're kind of reliving it in a way, which can be really intense for a lot of people. And what's interesting about the modalities that we're talking about, the different types of behavioral therapy or psychedelics like ketamine or EMDR, is it's almost like a shortcut around that, where you don't have to like be present in that trauma, which for the person experiencing it, it feels like they're reliving the trauma.
I think it's very interesting. I think that with ketamine, it is like a reset button on the brain, allowing this thing called the default mode network to cease, or at least like for some time, and allows you to rewrite those patterns that you have. But I think that there's a lot of other research that shows that with ketamine, if there is something subconscious, I think Carl Jung he loved talking about the collective subconscious, right? Which is very, very interesting. And a lot of the very smart physicians and people who I read about and learn from, they would say that when you're in a ketamine state, you're almost in a subconscious dream-like state. And so you are in your subconscious and you're seeing things that you can't run from. And you're forced to confront it, actually. So if it's something that's coming up, maybe a trauma perhaps, or whatever, it'll come up.
Versus the other option, which would be to bury it down and avoid it, and then
right?
and so really, trauma work or EMDR, it's really about getting the communication to happen between those different parts of the brain, which, were like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, and resolve that to move past it. And we do a lot of that naturally, but for some of us and for some memories, they really do get stuck.
Oh yeah, no, you're definitely stuck. So part of what you have to do is, again, the work. And I love this word that people use sometimes at the office, which is shadow work. This comes from people who've done a lot like ayahuasca, and they've gone to ibogaine, and they use kind of more of a shamanistic type of theory on their healing. And I think it's an interesting way to look at the subconscious, which is what it is. So you have to do the work, but you can do it by what is that one phrase that I love that Carl Jung? Unless you bring the subconscious to consciousness, it will run your life and you'll call it fate, right? And that
And
is
that
so
is so
true.
true. Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so you have to then understand if there's something that's been bothering you, it won't, I mean, it could, I mean, theoretically, I mean, people try to bury things and maybe they will kind of go away. But if it's something that's been really, really awful, you try to bury it and it's kind of, you build these psychological defenses, but they'll break through, and maybe stressful times, maybe, and you'll snap at somebody that you didn't mean to or normally wouldn't have, or at nighttime, people actually their subconscious defenses go down at
Yeah.
night, and they'll have nightmares at night, in the evening. They'll start taking medicines to kind of make sure they sleep, and so it's better to confront them and
And
allow
so
them to fester.
yeah, and I love that you brought that up, this idea of shadow work. And one tool that I've used in the past is when certain feelings that are uncomfortable come up, I try to interrogate them. I say, I see you're here. Welcome to the table. I'm not going to push you away. What do you have to teach me? And just by acknowledging those feelings, I almost feel this immediate like lessening of their intensity. And, again, with trauma work, there are these sort of theories that we have different parts of ourselves deep within, maybe arrested at certain ages when we had a specific trauma, like, your father spanked you when you were 5 years old or something. And so there are these sort of like parts within us of different ages that just want to be seen and acknowledged. And that is truly what I think of when people say doing the work. It's that work of integration, of
Well,
taking all
you know
these.
who else said that? It was
Who?
Carl Jung. Carl Jung.
Okay.
Yeah, I never really knew who I was in terms of my philosophical bend on psychology, because I'm not a, I didn't go into psychology as like as an undergrad or in grad school, but over the last decade of just really being into the work. So
Mhm.
yeah, so his goal was to integrate all your parts, and I think that Freud, his predecessor, I mean, he was very famous for bringing the theory of the subconscious out, right? So, and then of course Carl Jung just wants you to integrate your subconscious and your conscious, and of course there's this other thing called the collective subconscious or unconsciousness. And I find that a very interesting thing. You put together the whole, into, make the parts into one, and that way everything's in harmony.
And it's a magical thing when it happens. I hope all of us get there one day.
Right. Yeah. I'll let you know in 20, 30 years how that is.
Brilliant. You had a few more details that you wanted to share with us about ketamine and how it works. Is now a good time to go into that a
Sure.
little
Yeah. No,
bit?
it's always interesting time. So again, like ketamine, it is not a miracle drug. So the way
Mhm.
that you or anyone should look at ketamine or any of these other motifs, these modalities of treatment, is that you have to put the work in, right? And the work is working with a therapist and using the cognitive behavioral therapy, or if you're using hypnotherapy. Now, I've learned recently hypnotherapy is extremely effective, and it's gone out of favor, kind of, but for many many years it was actually the treatment, and actually is very effective for PTSD. And if you were to combine, so ketamine, what you want to do with ketamine is you want to have your intention going in, and whatever it is that you're working on. So there's always an intention that you have, and what it might be, and then that is the intention phase. And this is maybe for any type of like treatment, but especially for ketamine. And then you'll have your journey phase or trip phase. I don't like using the word trip because that sounds too hokey.
It's very
Throwback to,
1960s.
yeah, it's the 60s. We're on a trip, man. It's your journey or experiential phase. You're experiencing it. Now, ketamine, what part of the intention phase and the preparation phase is you have to be ready, because your unconscious, or subconscious will be there,
Mhm.
so just be ready for if there's something that you've been pushing away for a lot of years, you're going to meet it. You're going to be in a dream state, in a dreamlike state where you'll be, you know, you'll see the subconscious, whatever it is that's there, and if you have fears that are there, if you have maybe past memories that you just don't like, whatever, or something about yourself, it'll be there. And so
Mhm.
that is the experiential part of ketamine. So you'll see these almost like a spiritual thing. You might have like spiritual tropes that will come up. And, if you have some like a bad trauma, it might appear like a monster. Now, the cool, interesting thing about ketamine is that ketamine, it will reward you if you deal with these things, and it'll also punish you if you don't. So if you run away from the monster will become more scary. But if you head towards it, it might turn into, an angel. It might turn into like a field of flowers or something to reward you. And then you'll come out of your state once the medicine has been worn off, and you'll have the integration phase. And the integration phase is the most important part, because then you have to connect the dots of what you saw. So what did you see? Well, I saw a monster. But when I started confronting it, I realized, that I wasn't, that wasn't the monster, and the whole situation wasn't as bad as I thought it was, or whatever it might be, right? And that's like the part where you have to kind of really put together, and that's through, either your own work that you're doing with worksheets or something, or hopefully a therapist. And the integration phase can take a long time, so just go back to your therapist and put all that together, and eventually you'll have a greater understanding of yourself. And you don't have to run away from yourself, and the things that might have happened might have like a less effect on you in an emotional way, because again, ketamine can allow you to have a greater neuroplastic state, and maybe if you intend to have less, of a emotional response to your memories, then it is very possible for you to then reprogram yourself.
And what you're really indicating is this sort of mental or conscious alchemy and the magic of transformation. And I think what's really powerful about what we're talking about today is that a lot of people don't have language or understanding of what the emotional landscape is about and how to navigate it. And so, what happens when we don't understand something, we tend to fear it and we tend to run away from it. So, I think that you're giving our listeners a really great just
Right.
model in which to, I mean, we could confront those demons or whatever just in our waking state of like, oh, here's that feeling again, like don't run away from it. What is it here to tell you?
Right. No, that's like a thing. I think that sometimes too, like I had this thought the other day, just driving down to one of our locations in Torrance, where everyone's a hero in their own journey, right? But then the tough pill to swallow is, what if you were an enemy? Because if there's a hero, there's like a hero, but there has to then be a villain, right? So then a lot of us don't never look at ourselves as a villain, and maybe you made a mistake or something. God knows I have, right? And so I can speak from experience, and then so you never want to think of yourself as the villain, but then while you're thinking about it, well, you have to own up to whatever that might be, or if it's something that's coming up. And I was doing that actually the other day. I was like, what when have I been a villain? Oh, many times.
Yeah, we both hurt and been hurt in life,
Mhm.
and so part of being a grown up is really taking stock and maybe evaluating our blind spots. Because I'm sure even Hitler thought he was a good guy. He
Oh
was
yeah,
doing the
no, of
world a
course.
favor, and
He was like the ultimate hero for his people, and he all these things. And so, but at the same time, like, you have to be honest with yourself, and then forgive yourself as well, and learn what
yeah,
you can, and
yeah,
then move on is the most important part. Let it
it's
go.
part of human evolution. And so, what I'm really hearing you say, Rishi, is we are in all of these processes and all these attempts to understand our inner world and inner consciousness, we're confronting some of our habits. And habits are these very powerful pathways that we lay down in our brains and we keep reinforcing over
Mm.
and over and over again. And it I think kind of peaks in as we get older. I feel like specifically our age where we're at right now, we've really
What,
ingrained
30, 32?
32, 33. We really ingrained some mental habits. And so in his famous book, The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck talked a lot about these mental maps that we have, and that the work of spiritual growth is we think we have a map and it's accurate, but then we come across new information and we have to revise that map. And revision of the map takes energy. And that is the work of growth, is expending energy to constantly expand the map and understand more. Because that saying, the older I get, the less I know.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think to bring back a point too about you can develop these habits, these mental habits that are good and also bad. So if you're used to life about flogging yourself and denigrating yourself, or again, like the quote that you said at the beginning is like, watch your thoughts. Your thoughts become words, but even if they're just words you speak to yourself internally, I mean, they still program you, right? And
Yeah.
so if you always have these mental habits of always feeling like you're always wrong, you'll enforce that, and then if you travel down the same pathways again, where these bad emotional pathways, you can enforce that as well. And so it's just, yeah. We have, and as we get older, the more that we travel a road, just like anything, our neurons will also have more ingrained. It'll be deeper, these grooves, and it's tough to kind of get out of these mental habits.
It sure is. And it's interesting to take stock of that inner critic and listen to what that critic says, and are they kind or not? And really, it's up to us to change the tone of that critic. And we do have a lot of messaging that we internalize from the external world, and we can be our biggest ally or our worst enemy. So I guess the choice is ours, but it sometimes takes some years of becoming conscious of that.
So there's a term that I was just thinking about today, which is the authentic self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is something where our personas that we have, our bodies that we have, our even our feelings and our the habits that we have, we're always changing, right? We're always changing, but there's always one thing that's always constant, and that is the authentic self. And then part of the goal of being an adult, as we become older and more understanding and self-aware, is to be self-aware of that authentic self, not the persona self, not the whatever it might be that you think that you are, but the real person directing all of that. And if you can become secure in the authentic self, that's kind of the ultimate goal. There's like a word for that in Vedic Sanskrit, which is called samadhi,
Yeah.
but that's for a different topic altogether.
Well, that is truly the goal, is for us to all reach samadhi, which I guess maybe in terms of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs would be right at the top. It would be self, what's the word?
I think realization, self,
Self-realization. Yeah.
right?
You are at your highest expression and
That's
most
right.
true to yourself, where we can
Sure.
drop all the personas and just really exist, maybe like we did when we were children, and just joyful and spontaneous and living in the present. That brings up another quote that I have, because today is Lao Tzu Day and I love his work. This one says, if you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you're anxious, you are living in the future. And if you are at peace, you are living in the present. Would you agree, Rishi, that a lot of our psychological burdens are from not living in the present?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. I think absolutely. I think that being present, there's only one time in life, and that is the present. And a
Hmm.
lot of what we do is, especially for if you want to talk about, I love the word neuroses. It's another word that's not really used anymore, but it's a Jungian thing. Plug out to my boy Carl Jung.
Love him.
And so yeah, and with neuroses that we have, our anxiety, for instance, it's about thinking about the future. Anxiety essentially is punishing ourselves for bad events that might happen to you, right?
Mhm.
Um, why punish yourself for something that hasn't even happened yet or ever will, right? And then another way that we hurt ourselves by not being present is by thinking about the past mistakes that we've had, and you punish yourself for that. What's the point? You can't go back in the past. It's locked.
Right.
It's locked. So then learn what you can. But so why punish yourself? Maybe learn. Don't do that again. Like, oh, geez, I won't stick my hand on that stove again. That's probably
But
smart, right?
probably smart. That's good survival techniques.
But you won't like punish yourself. Like, God, I can't believe I touched that stove. Oh,
So, yeah, I think a lot of our mental issues are from being trapped in the past or anxious about the future. And this is what we're trying to address through trauma work, through, again, behavioral therapy changes, just really getting back to this present moment, which, like you said, is everything that we have. And the
there. I have a quote too. Punishing ourselves for bad events that might happen to you, right?
Mhm.
Um, why punish yourself for something that hasn't even happened yet or ever will, right? And then another way that we hurt ourselves by not being present is by thinking about the past mistakes that we've had, and you punish yourself for that. What's the point? You can't go back in the past. It's locked.
Right.
It's locked. So then learn what you can. But so why punish yourself? Maybe learn. Don't do that again. Like, oh, geez, I won't stick my hand on that stove again. That's probably
But
smart, right?
probably smart. That's good survival techniques.
But you won't like punish yourself. Like, God, I can't believe I touched that stove. Oh,
So, yeah, I think a lot of our mental issues are from being trapped in the past or anxious about the future. And this is what we're trying to address through trauma work, through, again, behavioral therapy changes, just really getting back to this present moment, which, like you said, is everything that we have. And the,
there. I have a quote too
yeah,
that speaks directly to that. Yes, I'm gonna just tell you because it's quote day and it's
okay, it's quote day.
International Quote Day. Right. Let me see here. Surrender to what is. Let go of what was. Have faith in what will be. So be here. Surrender to what is. Be
Who
present.
wrote that?
That
Rishi
is someone named Sonia Rakati. I don't
Love
know who that
her.
is.
Love her. And Ram Dass, right? Be here now. He summed it up in 3 words. So
Fair.
simple. Yeah. All the great minds. Perfect. Um, and so you do offer EMDR at your clinic. And again, I just really wanted to echo that it's one of these beautiful processes where people can really confront past trauma, but without having to dive right into it. Maybe in a quick nutshell, you can break down what it is. It has to do with eye movement while the person is sort of recalling whatever event it was that is troubling them.
Yeah. So it was invented in the 80s, and the way that we have our memories stored in our hippocampus can be accessed by certain eye movements. Now, without going into the science of it, it's very interesting, and I'd like to, but we don't have enough time for that. We can by essentially by moving your eyes across the horizontal plane as if you're walking in nature. It allows you to the brain to actually then go back to whatever memory that is that we're going to direct. And as I mentioned before, our trauma memories are stored in a different way than our regular memories are, right? So it goes from our trauma memories essentially, they go straight from short-term storage into long-term storage in our hippocampus and our long-term memory based off of the amount of emotion that's happening at that time, right? And then anyway, what will happen for if you work with an EMDR therapist, they will walk you through the steps and you'll get to those trauma memories, which is why you have to be ready. And the process to get ready for that is a thing called ego strengthening, because you might be flooded. I mean, like I've been blessed with a life where I have had, obviously I've had trauma, but nothing where it's just absolutely just horrible, right? It wasn't
Right.
anything horrible that I've experienced where it would just be, just mess me up, for a long time. And how, but if there is something like that in your past, or maybe it feels like that to you, it's all relative. No one can ever tell you what your experience of life is, right? Only you can. So if it's something from the past and it's something that you've been avoiding, you'll go back to that particular memory, and then slowly over time, you'll go through and then change that memory. Because that's the funny thing about neuroplasticity, is that even your memories can be changed in the way that you think about something. If I were to suggest, that there was a clown at a birthday party, you can implant memories too for people, and they really truly think that there was, a clown or whatever implantable memory is. So you'd have like a different way that you would think about. That's why eyewitness testimony is never really reliable, and so we'll even make a memory that's even worse than what it actually was. If you had a paper cut, for instance, but it was at the right time at your wedding maybe, or something, it would be like the most horrible, but it's a paper cut, right? And in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, so your therapist will then help you make that particular memory less strong on your present, so it's not going to emotionally affect you. And essentially, that's done through a few days, essentially for a few weeks, maybe even a few months. And then when you think back to that memory, it's not going to have that same effect on you anymore. And eventually it'll pass.
Wow. And it's called ego strengthening, you said, that
Well,
process.
the portion to get ready for your EMDR, right? So you're not flooded. So there's an ego strengthening portion of EMDR, and then there's going to be the EMDR. And EMDR is a process. So it's not just something where a very talented psychotherapist will just wing it, and they'll feel it out. It's not like that. There's a whole process that's there, and they go through that checklist with you.
Brilliant. It sounds so cutting edge, and how incredible that we have these tools available for people today. And I hope that this is something people listening can really explore if it works for them and really get value from. So perfect. I think we talked about some good things today, Rishi.
Yeah, no, we'd always talk more, but I appreciate always talking about to you and to any of our listeners out there. And part of life is to well, there's another funny quote, and I'll quote it. It was just life is a journey through oneself, by oneself, to oneself. And so we're always on this journey, and you're always learning about yourself and always learning. I would just suggest just be open. You can't know everything about yourself, and be open to new things.
Everybody's got a little piece of the puzzle to help you learn about
Mhm.
yourself and to help the other person along the way. So, thank you all for listening. We're so happy to continue to bring this content to you. And we will be back shortly to bring you more ways to stay conscious. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.